Hello, everyone. Thank you for waiting. We'll get started in just a moment. My name is Holly. I'll be your co-host, one of your co-hosts today. We do have speaker Jennifer Lee here today. And I suppose she wanted to go ahead and do an introduction when she's ready.
Sure. Can you, that's actually like the third screen on that PowerPoint. So my name is Jennifer Leahy. I am the program director at Project Rebound at California State University, Fresno. I also have the honor of teaching as an adjunct lecturer in the criminology department at Fresno State, as well as with the Rising Scholar program at Merced Community College in their incarcerated instruction program. So I teach one class with Merced at Valley State Prison and Central California Women's Facility. Currently, we are doing that correspondence, but normally I do go into the prison to teach. But of course, my true job and my true calling is the program director for Project Rebound. And although Project Rebound is located at Fresno State, it's important to understand that we are the very essence of this pipeline that we're going to talk about today, because Project Rebound reaches from Humboldt County to San Diego, and Project Rebound reaches into the 35 prisons that are in California. And we work with our local community colleges and our local adult schools. We also work with underground scholars in the UC system. And so we're kind of in the middle. And because of our fortunate positioning, we are able to work in both directions on this pipeline. Next slide, please. So in talking about the pipeline, you hear that term a lot. And so just for clarification, in case anybody on the in the conversation today doesn't really understand what we're talking about, I want to clarify both what the school to prison pipeline was, it still is, and the prison to school pipeline that we are proactively creating to reverse what some of our policies and legislation have done to damage various communities, in particular our minority impoverished communities. So in the 1980s, we know about the war on drugs. School discipline policies and untrained educators created a path for individuals that were struggling with anything at all, whether it was mental health or abuse at home, or inappropriate behaviors like domestic violence at home. Even if it wasn't directly related to them, if they brought any of these problems into the classroom, they were labeled as problem children, and they were ostracized and pushed out of their academic pursuits. We are beginning to change the terminology from dropout to push out. More and more educators refuse to use that term dropout, suggesting that individuals engage in this activity and disassociate themselves from education by choice. Well, first of all, we're talking about youth. We're talking about junior high and early high school individuals who don't really have a full understanding of the decisions that they are making at that time. And so to assign that responsibility to them is truly an error we need to correct. And when I say there were untrained educators, part of what was happening was a social belief that these individuals were creating so many problems, and that they were dangerous, and that they needed to be removed from the classroom. In combination with that, we had mandatory sentencing, which tied the hands of several judges that may have been invested in rehabilitation or may have been invested in other alternatives, but had no choice but to send people who got in trouble to prison. And so we saw a tremendous increase in our juvenile offenders and adult offenders. One of the things that I want to point out is the money in the 1980s. So despite the fact that in 1980, polls showed that the American public, less than 2% of the American public believed that drugs were a problem in 1980. Despite that, our administration at the time, Reagan, chose to move funding from education into corrections and law enforcement. FBI went from 8 million to 95 million. DEA from 86 million to 1,026 million. But while they were increasing all of this funding going towards policing and incarceration, they were also pulling money out of the education departments. The National Institute of Drug Abuse went from $274 million in funding to $57 million. The Department of Education from 14 million to 3 million. And so the money shows us exactly what the mentality was during this period of time. Truly focused on incarceration. And we've seen the results of that, the mass incarceration, the huge numbers that have just enveloped our criminal justice system. And in order to reverse that pipeline, in order to stop sending and funneling people into prison just because they don't necessarily fit into what a particular person's idea of a perfect student is, rather than helping that student, or rather than seeing that student as someone with promise, they became problematic and they were pushed out. So to reverse that, one of the things that we actively do, and when I say we in this sense, I'm talking about any program that's working within this population. Project Rebound is just one of many. So reversing the pipeline includes in-reach into prisons, into jails, and into juvenile facilities. We absolutely have to be able to go in and dispel, both for the administration, the custody, and those individuals that are incarcerated, dispel those ideas that this is it. You've screwed up so much that you've ended up incarcerated, and now this is your life for the rest of your life. That whole concept of once one, always one has to be proactively disseminated and destroyed, okay? One of the things that we do, of course, is partnerships with community colleges, in particular Rising Scholars, and not just with Fresno City. I mean, Fresno City is one of the major funnels in terms of students coming into Fresno State through transfer. The vast majority of our students come from Fresno City. And that includes not just our formerly incarcerated individuals, but also the other non-incarcerated individuals. But we also work with other community colleges trying to create that intentional handoff between the community college and our university. The reason that this is so important for our individuals that are formerly incarcerated is because they tend to isolate and they tend to withdraw, and they tend to, even if they are dedicated and determined to get that education, they feel like they're in a silo oftentimes, and they feel like they're alone. I felt that way. Arnold felt that way. Almost every student I have ever spoken with that is part of Project Rebound feels that way. Now, understand too as well that we're building an intentional family, okay? This is not just a program. This is a group of individuals with a similar past, dedicated to a future similar goal. And in that sense, we are family. We help each other. We all bring something of value or wisdom to the table, and we share that with each other and help support and move each other forward. Next slide, please. So why is this pipeline important? I'm sure everyone has seen this little cartoon here with the various animals and the person of authority on the other side of the desk, which I've heard mentioned several times throughout the symposium. And he's saying, for fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb the tree. So again, I think I'm probably preaching to the choir at this point, but we have to remember that equity is not the same as equal. Everybody comes to where they're at in their journey along this pipeline from wherever they were, whether it's the pipeline starts at kindergarten, or they dropped out in 8th grade, or they completed their high school, or they started a couple of college classes, or maybe they've got their AA degree and now they want to go to the university. They come here and now they want to go on and get their PhD at Berkeley. Education is a lifelong thing. That's the pipeline. It's never ending. Okay. And understanding that everybody comes into the pipeline without having the same foundation. All right. And so equity is not necessarily equal. Obviously, the monkey can climb the tree, but the penguin is like, you gotta be kidding me. The only way for this to work is to meet that person where they're at, and then help them make up the difference to where they need to be. Okay. We do this as a family. And if this was our Project Rebound family, whether that person was at Fresno State or at Fresno City or working on their GED or still incarcerated, we work together. And the monkey would help the penguin get up the tree, and the elephant would take the fishbowl and put it up the tree, because we help each other. And that's how we balance our equity in this program. A lot of times, and this is another reason why the pipeline is so important, is that assumption of knowledge. Every 3-year-old in the world can operate a phone. It's amazing to me. But when we come home from incarceration, we don't have those experiences. We don't have 20 years worth of playing on tablets and iPads and telephones. And there is an assumption of knowledge when we come into the classroom, where the instructor says, okay, I need you to upload this. I need you to do this. I need you to submit it this way. Only use a PDF tag, or only use RTF. And you're like, what is this person talking about? It's like they're speaking in a foreign language. And so the reason the pipeline is important is because that individual knows that they are connected in this pipeline, right? There are intentional spots along the pipeline where people know that they have somebody that they can go to and say, hey, I don't understand this. Can you help me? Digital technology has been mentioned several times throughout the symposium. I think that it's interesting that our older students, and we've even seen some professors after we went to digital fully online during COVID, we've even seen some professors retire, resisting the use of this technology, but this is the future. In fact, we've been working with CDCR to get tablets in a closed circuit system, a CDCR canvas, so that we can continue to work with our students using digital technology. That is part of the pipeline. That is part of building and filling in the gaps, all right, to build that equity. Undoing stigmatization. This is something that we do intentionally, and inside of this this path that we pull individuals into, right? Teaching them that their past that does not define them. Yes, that is part of who you were, but it is not who you are now, and it is not who you will be in the future. And helping that person to shift their thoughts, their definitions, their ideas about themselves and who they are in their community. And as they undo that, they began to move out in the community, and they began to have important leadership roles, and they have a positive impact, and they bring quality back into their community. And not only does this active participation in the community, some of which we facilitate until our students are taking those leadership roles and facilitating these things on their own, but it not only undoes the stigmatization for the individual themselves in terms of their identity, but it also undoes the stigmatization that the community has, right? So when I move out into the world, I don't necessarily disclose that I'm formerly incarcerated. I am who I am today. And yes, that's part of my past, but I don't necessarily disclose that to people. When they find out, they're usually surprised. And I have realized, and I have been told, that undoes part of their internal biases, their intentional dislike or beliefs about what constitutes someone who is formerly incarcerated. Because they like me, they think I'm a good person, they see I'm doing good things in the community, that I live a wholesome life, quote unquote. And they see that, and it begins to make them question the stereotypes that they have created. All right. So undoing stigmatization is twofold. Mental health addiction, or mental health and addiction, are also things that we are intentional about within this pipeline, because we understand that these are two things that cross over heavily with formerly incarcerated individuals. Addiction and mental health even if the individual did not have mental health issues prior to going to prison, the carceral system, the way that it is set up, is designed, even if officers or correctional officers or administration or law enforcement, even if they don't mean to traumatize an individual, the whole process itself is set up to undermine a person's mental health, the removal of choice, the removal of authority and autonomy over yourself. One of the other important things about the pipeline is that most of our individuals that come to us are first generation students. And so that means that they don't even know most of the time, what is a FOSFA, right? What does that stand for? And how does it work? And the application for the CSU Apply, oh my goodness, they said they made it simple when the last time they changed it. And it's one of the most difficult things I've ever done. It takes hours and it's complicated and it's intimidating. Even for me, and I've done it several times and helped many students navigate it. So being a first generation person means that you don't have anybody that you can go ask, what does this mean? And what should I do? That's going to advise you about the timelines and the deadlines and all of those things. And once a person is in that pipeline, though, they have a multitude of individuals along the path of the pipeline to help them, right? So they have the people that help them with their high school. They have the people that help them while they were at community college. They have the people that are helping them at the CSU level. And we reach back and forth through this pipeline to help individuals. Financial barriers are a continual ongoing problem. And so is homelessness. And we intentionally work with these particular issues because we know with our students, a person who is formerly incarcerated, that the likelihood of homelessness and financial barriers are very high. And so we are intentional about building partnerships with people in the community and on campus that can help these students. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what's already in place? What have we got going already? Project Rebound, obviously, is founded on the concept of each one, teach one. We believe that everybody has value and they bring that wisdom to the table. So whether you're the program director, the student assistant, the outreach coordinator, or an intern, or just a student, we come together as a whole and we accept information and we give information equally, right? So it's a very horizontal design, and it's done that way intentionally. And part of that is because all of us have a problem with authority. And so we're getting over that and we're realizing that not all authority is bad. And I've heard that again several times during the symposium. But one of the things that I think is important is that we start to unpack that and begin to realize that the authority in the past, many of those, say, for example, instructors from our youth, were less educated than they needed to be, that they were uninformed and they made mistakes. And so unpacking that distaste for authority is important. And I think Project Rebound and how it's based on each one, teach one helps to do that. Rebuilding identity is important, not seeing yourself as who you were, but seeing yourself as who you want to be, right? Collective advocacy, building community, building stability, knowing that you are part of a group and knowing that you're not alone. So that if you encounter negative pushback or if you encounter a struggle, that speed bump in your path doesn't become a brick wall because you have other people to come with you and support you through it. Empowerment, intentional empowerment. Our outreach coordinator, Arnold Trevino, he works with the community and with our students, and we do it intentionally to empower them to be able to speak, to empower them to be able to take leadership roles, create programs or activities in the community that give back. All of the students I find have this really deep need, as I do myself, to give back to the communities that they have harmed. And we are blessed with state funding. Project Rebound has been state funded officially as a line item on the state budget and for the CSU system. And we work and advocate with legislators to prove our worth, which is easy to do when we have multiple graduates, and many of which are Dean's medalists and winning scholarships and going off to Berkeley and whatnot on full rides. And then next slide, please. One of the things that I want to point out is that this is Daniel. He's one of our students graduating this year. Daniel's been with us since he was incarcerated. We've been working with him since he was incarcerated, writing to him and corresponding with him and helping him transition back into education when he returned back to the community. He went through a workshop that was about building your future self, who you want to be. And the first picture shows Daniel working on his project on creating his ID about who he is in the future. And then we have this picture, this hazmat ID title, spill containment and cleanup, right? So he wanted to work and has been going to school for and went through this Future IDs project with Gregory Sale, who's a visiting professor from Arizona State University. And this was a display that was actually at Alcatraz for a year. Daniel's ID, his future ID, was displayed here, as you can see. Next slide, please. What we saw, though, is that Daniel's future, what he envisioned, actually came to fruition. And that's the practical magic. We gave in this pipeline, and I say we, I mean everybody again, that's supporting individuals that come into the pipeline. So we, as supporters, build him up, help him re-envision who he is, and help him succeed. We write letters of recommendation. We encourage him. We get him tutors when he struggles with a class. This is why that pipeline is so important, because from each step, with each individual thing that would become that brick wall, Arnold and myself and Alex and Victoria and Veronica and Daniel, and the list goes on and on. Dustin, we all come together and break that brick wall down. As a result, the practical magic here is that you can see that Daniel is standing here. That's the San Francisco airport behind him. He's now working for Hensel and Phelps. Hensel Phelps. He did his internship there for the summer, and at the end of the internship, they offered him a job. So when he graduates, he's moving right into the very job that he wished to be in, that he envisioned himself in. And Daniel is an example of what that pipeline does. Okay, next slide, please. So again, what's already in place? We have a CRIM 136T class at Fresno State. This includes both both sides of our cohorts. We have a matriculated cohort at Fresno State, which are currently enrolled students. And then we have a larger cohort, our larger family, which includes everybody who meets two goals. First, formerly incarcerated. Second, positive progress towards an academic goal. We're not recruiting for Fresno State. Again, we're just trying to help people obtain their academic goals. We are all about higher education. That's true. But it's not all about Fresno State, although we are blessed and happy to be at Fresno State. And as alum, I love Fresno State. But I and Arnold and Dr. Hughes and everybody else involved in Project Rebound agrees. We want our students to achieve their dream. We want their pipeline to go to their dream. We just want to support them along the way. And so the 136T class, on the right-hand side, you see many students that Aaron, who has graduated, and other students that never even came to Fresno State, but they were part of our 136T class, where it's a 1-unit credit, no credit course that we do through Open University. We do it every year. We pay the tuition for the 1 unit. It's 1 unit that's applicable towards your bachelor degree. It's transferable to any university. And we talk about different topics every time, and we talk about relevant social justice issues at that time. Okay. And that's part of that pipeline. Okay. Bringing people onto campus so that they can see themselves in an academic classroom at Fresno State with other people that are already enrolled, so that it doesn't become some pipe dream. It becomes a reality, and it becomes a pathway, and they know that they have support all the way into the next step. Community partnerships are critical. No university or college stands alone. We must work together. We have students that come to us that aren't ready for transfer yet. And we have an amazing group at Fresno City, and we would love to see the same thing duplicated at other universities or other community colleges like College of Sequoias or West Hills, Porterville College. We would love to see what you are doing at Fresno City duplicated at these other places to support the students that we have there. So when we receive students that aren't ready for transfer, we have a direct line to put them into the pipeline safely with Victoria and Alex and the other individuals with Rising Scholars at Fresno City College. We know that when we put them into the pipeline at that point, that they will be well taken care of as they move along. Rising Scholars is one of the most incredible organizations, no matter where we work with them at Merced Community College as well. And it is that warm handoff that is so essential. Root and Rebound helps us with the legal barriers, the record cleaning. They've come and done clinics here in Fresno. They're always open to help individuals remove those legal barriers to their success. And one of the reasons that this pipeline is so critical and that we have reached both forwards and backwards along that person's pipeline to their academic goal, the reason it is so important is because many of us have criminal backgrounds that are going to take some time to clean up. And the certificate of rehabilitation, that's something you need to start on immediately. Developing those mitigating factors and the rehabilitative evidence, the proof on paper that shows that you have been rehabilitated so that you can eventually take that into a court and have the same state that convicted you of a crime, have that same state come back and say, we believe you are rehabilitated and here's the paperwork to prove it. Those things are important, but you have to start working on them early, right? And so it's a continual process. Next slide, please. So what's still needed? And we have all this great stuff in place on the pipeline, but the work is not done yet. And two primary things that I want to talk about, Incarcerated Student Bill of Rights and the state funding for Rising Scholars. SB 416, AB 417, write your legislators, support these things, call them, let them know that you think that this is a good investment. These are things that are still in play. They have not been decided yet. Incarcerated Student Bill of Rights. So one of the things that I noticed as, and our incarcerated students, of course, are in this pipeline as well, right? We need to make sure that as they transition from prison into the community, that transition is as smooth as possible. Understanding that we need to be responsible for the equity in moving in removing all of the barriers between them and where they need to be. And that includes lack of information. So one of the things that I noticed when we went from face-to-face college education in the prisons to correspondence was that the number of our classrooms increased, almost doubled, which is good, more students. But the quality of the instruction, no matter how hard I tried, it lacked a really essential part of education. And that's that interface, the back and forth that you have with a student or a group of students when you know that they're right on the precipice of understanding a concept that's important. And you talk them through it to the very top, to that aha moment where they get it, right? And that is lacking in correspondence education. The lag of 1 or 2 weeks for a response while the student has moved on. It's critical that we have a student bill of rights, that we prioritize accredited schools teaching inside the prison, that we prioritize face-to-face instruction, comprehensive in-person support. So think of all of the support that students get at the college, just regular students. All of the things that we put into play as administrators to make sure that our students have access to food and mental health services and tutors and the library. And these things are missing for our incarcerated students. They don't have them at all. And so this SB 416 is looking to make education a priority, right? It's common knowledge that education and recidivism are inversely related, right? They're connected to each other, they're related. So one goes up, the other goes down. So if you want recidivism, and that in turn means victimization, if you want that down in your community, education is a fantastic way to do it. Our incarcerated students have to work full time. They don't have any place quiet to study. VSP, CCWF, those are 8 people to a room. And without that opportunity to get away, to be able to focus and study, it's very difficult, on top of the fact that they're working. Okay, so education, higher education in particular right now, is a voluntary program. And part of SB 416 will allow students to be able to be full-time students to get their programming credits. And of course, 417 we have discussed already, but that's the authorization of the Office of the Chancellor's Office for community colleges to continue to fund the Rising Scholars Program and network. Next slide, please. So having legislative power is important. Having backing by the state of California is critical, because money's always going to be an issue. It's always going to be an issue. One of the things that's really important about the pipeline as well is that a lot of times students have misconceptions about what that transfer looks like. Oftentimes, these are the questions that we receive from students. Can I receive an AA or an AS and still not be eligible for the CSU? Next slide. Yes, that is true. I've had students coming home from prison with 5 AA degrees. I've had students come from not so much Fresno City, but other community colleges that don't have the kind of support, the pipeline like we have between FCC and Fresno State. Colleges where we don't have that. I have multiple students come to me and they're like, I completed my AA degree, I'm ready to transfer to Fresno State. And I look and they still don't have the Golden 4. You can get an AA or an AS and not be eligible to transfer, okay? And that's important. You know, it's really important. And we don't find that problem where we have the pipeline, but we do find that problem where we don't have the pipeline. So next slide. The ADT, a degree with a guarantee, means that I'm guaranteed to get my local CSU school, right? No, it does not. So they developed the ADT to make sure that individuals would know how to transfer. You have to take these classes, and then not only do you get your degree, but you also are eligible to transfer to a CSU, and you're guaranteed to graduate in 2 years if you graduate with your ADT. The problem with that, of course, is that once you get to the University of California, it doesn't always work. So for example, at Fresno State, in our business school, the Craig School of Business, they have decided within their curriculum, they have decided that you have to have this particular class, lower division class, before you can, in order to graduate. Well, this particular class is not part of the ADT for business at the community college level. So even if you get an ADT in business, you can't transfer to Fresno State with the guarantee. You can get in, you just have to have this additional class, which means you're not going to graduate in 2 years. So it's complicated, right? It's complicated. Of course it's complicated because every university is different, right? All right, but I have the 60 semester units or 90 quarter units and a 2.0 GPA. Next slide. Some universities have additional requirements. All right, so for example, Fresno State is impacted in several of our colleges. If you go into Africana Studies for a bachelor's degree, you only have to have a GPA of 2.0. So that'll work, that's fine, right? If you wanna go into agricultural business though, if you're a local person, you're within the local realm, you come from College of Sequoias, you come from Porterville, you come from FCC, you come from Clovis, no problem. 2.0 GPA, no problem. However, if you're coming from Merced, you have to have a 3.0. What? Different? Yes. So a lot of these little nuances are things that individuals won't know unless they're in that pipeline, okay? Because we have learned from our mistakes, and we have intentionally looked to see where our students are missing and in terms of equity. And we try very hard to address those things early on and specifically. Next slide, please. So when do you apply for college? This is also an issue because community colleges are open universities. They are open registration, right? If school starts tomorrow, as long as I can get my application in and done, by the time the classes start, and even then a couple of days late, you'll probably be okay. You can get into class. But for CSUs, there's a tremendous gap. CSU applications, fall semester, October to November, to start in the following August, right? So technically, if a person wants to go to the CSU, they have to apply in their second semester, right? They have to be intentional about this. And third semester, I guess, is technically when they will apply. But all too often, I have individuals that come to me, either from a community college or from prison, and they've missed that deadline. And we work with them to be able to file late applications, and we have been successful, not with all, but with many people who have filed late applications. In fact, Daniel, who I mentioned earlier, paroled in March. He paroled in March, and we filed a late application for him to start school in the fall. We were able to get his transcripts. He was eligible. He had a loan that was in poor standing. So we worked with him to help him get his loan rehabilitated so that his financial aid was back into good standing. Academically, he was in good standing, but he had too many units because he had to change his major. So the major he was pursuing, when he went to prison, his felony conviction prevented him from continuing on that pathway. Some changes have been made since then. So at the time, however, there was a moral board that he would have to pass, and he couldn't do that. So we helped him pick out a new major, and he started to pursue that. The problem was, of course, with his SAP appeal, his SAP, the Student Academic Progress Report that financial aid runs, and he had too many units to be eligible because he had changed his major. So he had twice as many units as he should have. And so we helped him with that. We helped him file the appeal, and every semester we had to go through this process with Daniel. I have built fantastic relationships with financial aid and admissions at Fresno State. I am blessed to work with amazing people at Fresno State. But that again is part of that intentional pipeline. I know that my students are going to come with issues in financial aid. I know that my students are going to come with issues around admissions, whether it's late or for another reason. I know that this is coming, okay? So I work with them and I build these relationships intentionally so that they become financial aid and admissions become part of our pipeline, okay? That helps for this smooth transition when someone has the pipeline. Next slide, please. So what if you miss it, right? So I've talked about this a little bit. Next slide. There is an appeal process. Now, every university has an appeals process, but this is not something that's publicized. So unless you have that insider knowledge to know to even look for it, you're going to parole, say in December 15th, eligible to start at the university in the fall, but unable to because you've missed the deadline, right? And so why is it so critical for our students to be in that pipeline? Because when they come home from prison and they come back into the community college, or they come home from prison and they're ready to go to the UC, we have to be able to move them in the direction that they need to go. In general, at the university level, and in terms of education, research has shown conclusively that we lose students, all students, during the transition, right? From high school to college, from community college to the university. That's where we lose our students. Because there's so much, everything's different, and there's so much to do, and different deadlines and different procedures. And although the community college system and the California State University system are both public schools, we work differently. We are structured differently. And I am not an expert on how the community college works. So I defer to individuals like Mark McNiff, who has been an amazing asset, and Alex Banda, and Ray, and Victoria, and the people that I know at FCC, right? And I do the same with other community colleges because that's their field of expertise. But I also need to be involved with these students as they progress because of the deadlines and the differences at the university, to make sure that they've taken those classes and to make sure that they're filing when they need to file. And if they do miss the deadlines, I need to be able to help them through that appeals process. And we've learned to do it so that we can, right? Next slide, please. So I got denied. What do I do? Next slide. Appeal, right? Even if an individual does the application on time, and we have had this happen, perhaps they, and again, this is another one of the reasons that we want to be part of that pipeline in terms of when the person actually fills out the application, because we can catch some of these mistakes early on, because they're common mistakes. Excuse me. And so if we work with the students to make sure that they have filled out this application correctly, it's less likely to get denied, okay? But if the application to Fresno State actually does get denied, there is an appeal process. And part of that appeal process, again, for those students that are in the pipeline, they get to have Project Rebound support. They get to have that little letter of recommendation that goes to admissions with their appeal that says, hey, this student is not a standalone student. This student comes into this university already part of a program, already part of an established student support program, right? And admissions has told me specifically, any student, whether they're Project Rebound or Renaissance Scholars or EOP or a part of the Veterans Program, if a student comes into the university already plugged in with a student support services program, the chances of their graduation increases exponentially. So by having students in this pipeline and plugged in as they go along through their education, we're actually drastically increasing the chances that they're going to successfully graduate, right? And so next slide, please. Thank you. How am I going to pay for college? FOSFA, we explain what FOSFA is, constantly sharing our code, things like this, the Fresno State FOSFA code. First generation students don't even know what that is, right? And it's not their fault. It's just that they have not been exposed to other people that already had to do this. And so by being, again, in that pipeline, not to be repetitive, but in the pipeline, it helps, because when they hit that question and they're like, what are they talking about? Oh, it's written right there on the board. Back in the day when we were still in class, it's still in the university, and we will be again this fall. But I could just point, right? Oh, it's right there, 001147. That's the code for transferring your financial aid from your community college over to Fresno State. Next slide. Grants, and actually you can click through several of these if you wouldn't mind. Hugo. Scholarships. There's two more, or that's good. Nope, one back. Thank you. There are a lot of different ways to pay for college, and students, this is particularly true for students that are just coming from the prison. Our students that come from the community college generally already know all of this, but our students that come from incarceration don't at all. All of a sudden, someone wants to give them $10,000. Seriously? Okay. But we need to explain to them and make sure that they understand what's the difference between a grant and a scholarship and a loan, right? You don't have to pay that grant back. The scholarship is yours to keep as long as you meet the requirements for what you got the scholarship for. The loans, that's different. What's the difference? Subsidized and unsubsidized. Subsidized doesn't start accruing interest until you're out of school. So you have a chance to pay that down. You borrow $5,000 and you pay back $5,000 instead of paying back 7 or 8 or more because of interest. And explaining all of this so that our students don't end up in a financial crisis or do something silly like many young first-time freshmen students do, which is go out and buy a car or something like that with their financial aid. Next slide, please. I'm going to go through this really quickly because it really doesn't pertain to the pipeline. But one of the things that we always like to make sure that our students know is that once you become a Project Rebound student and you are matriculated over to Fresno State, we do have financial assistance for students, but we always need a receipt. Okay, it's really important. Application costs, dog days, books, school supply, parking, transportation. And then again, like I said, being part of that pipeline means that there are other people that recognize your need, and you just got to ask. You might be amazed at what you end up with. One of our students ended up receiving a car just because someone was moving and they needed to get rid of the car, and Project Rebound had been very supportive of them. And so they knew that this other Project Rebound student needed a car. Now it's not a BMW, but it runs. Okay. Next slide, please. Those are the benefits of being in part of the pipeline. You can change your major, right? Some are more difficult to get into than others. Some of them you may have trouble with in terms of moral boards. So what? You can overcome this being part of that pipeline, being involved with enough people who have the experience and the knowledge, partnered with other community organizations like Root and Rebound and Rising Scholars. These are the partnerships that we find essential in order for people to be successful. Okay, next slide, please. So what do I expect once I transfer? You're part of this pipeline, and now you've been pushed up and out into Fresno State. Next slide. You're going to see that you're part of an organization and a group that does outreach to help people learn how to speak in public, to help people face fears from the past. This is Arnold and I at Avenal State Prison. You can see the yard through the window there behind us. This is one of the classrooms. And if I remember correctly, this was the first time Arnold and I went in to do outreach at Avenal State Prison. I was terrified. My heart was beating out of my chest doing this. The first time Daniel went to do outreach at Pleasant Valley State Prison, or InReach is I guess technically what it is. He talked to me, called me, and texted me the whole way there, all the way up, and to when he was processing in. He was terrified, but when he came back out, he said, "I can't wait to go again. I can't wait to do it again." One, because of the hope that it brings, right? And again, that's part of that pipeline, is bringing people into this collective community of a funnel into something positive, and bringing hope that if one person can do it, why can't the next, right? And him facing his fear, he said that was really important. It was part of his healing process to be able to go back and look at where he had come from, to see how far he had come away from it. Next slide. We get to meet wonderful people. And this is Danny Murillo, who has been very active and participating in the symposium, author of the Possibility Report, which is amazing. If you haven't read it, I encourage you to do so. And this is Dr. Kimberly Greer, who is now the provost at Stanislaus State University. And Stanislaus State University is one of the newest Project Rebound members. Dr. Greer and Danny had joined us for our 136T class that I mentioned earlier. They came as guest speakers to our class. So it kind of gives you an idea of the types of things that we do to bring our community students and our Fresno State students together in that academic atmosphere. Next slide. And this is goodness, Rosemary Indo. So Rosemary Indo, who was at the time that Arnold and I went into Avenal, was the warden at Avenal State Prison. Incredibly supportive. She came up through the academic side. In fact, she was principal of the school when Arnold was going through education when he was incarcerated. He was in a Braille program, I think, at that time. And but Rosemary Indo, Warden Indo, was so instrumental in getting Project Rebound and other programs into her prison, because she understood how powerful and positive education and programming was. She understood that not only did it improve the outcomes of the individuals that were housed there, but it reduced violence on the yard and improved the overall quality of the prison conditions. Currently, Rosemary Indo, again, who used to be the warden, is now the associate director for FOBS. And that's the Female Offender and Special Housing program. And she's a fantastic addition to that. Next slide, please. And again, she's speaking at one of our 136T classes as well. This is one of our volunteer opportunities. This is also what you can expect being part of the pipeline. These are both Fresno State students and Fresno City students. And we are putting together Christmas gift bags for every female that is incarcerated at CCWF, which is an annual event where we go and volunteer to help put these bags together, bringing a multitude of community students and our community college students and our university students together to contribute and give back. Next slide, please. Another opportunity that Arnold organized was a gardening program where several of our volunteers, our Project Rebound volunteers, would go out and work at the gardens along with students from Selma. And they planted, tended, cared for, grew all of these vegetables at the garden on Fresno State. And then when they harvested them, they brought them over to the student cupboard at Fresno State and donated the product to be given out to students. So again, building that leadership and that sense of belonging in the community then these are individuals that some of them are Project Rebound and some of them are not. And so blending of those groups together. Next slide, please. This is one of our gift card giveaways after we transitioned into COVID mode. We have not been able to supply food vouchers on campus to offset food insecurity. So we have been giving gift cards as our funding allows to go towards offsetting food insecurity amongst our students. And that's just one of those events where we ask the students to come and see us so that we can have that little bit of interaction while respecting social distancing and safety protocols. Next slide. This is another example of a different giveaway where you can see that we're giving away printer paper and pens and notebooks and highlighters and other school supplies, making sure that all of our students have the necessary things to be successful as students. Next slide, please. And here you can see, our former dean, Dembeste from the College of Social Science, who has gone on to be provost in Washington State. Aaron and Arnold with all of his medals and accolades, and Aaron with all of his medals and accolades, along with Dr. Hughes. All of these individuals have been critical in terms of building the pipeline, maintaining the pipeline, and expanding the pipeline. Okay, and it takes an army, and it takes a lot of involvement. Dr. Dembeste and Dr. Hughes are not just allies; they are proactive advocates, and they are in the trenches building right along with this, despite the fact that they don't have a criminal background, but they believe wholeheartedly in the power of education to change people's lives. Next slide, please. Another one of our volunteer opportunities where we brought both our community students from, I think this is primarily Fresno City, and our Fresno State students together to volunteer at Habitat for Humanity on a Saturday afternoon. A lot of grunt work that was really hard, but we had a good time, had some lunch afterwards, and it felt good to be a part in a positive way of rebuilding the community, literally, with this program, because they build homes for people that need them. Next slide. This is another partnership that I haven't mentioned yet, which is Insight Garden Program. The t-shirts say sages, not cages, which I think is fantastic. They are active at Avenal State Prison and Central California Women's Facility here in the Valley, and several other places in California and around the United States. And this is part of our volunteer opportunity. And our Project Rebound students, both in the community and at Fresno State, engage in going back in and use this particular program, uses horticulture to teach people about inner gardening. And again, it's one of our partners in the community, with Calliope, who works at Fresno State, Monica works at Fresno State, Katarina works for IGP, and of course, at the time, Arnold was a student, and now he is an employee at Fresno State as well as IGP. Next slide, please. This was our first gift bag giveaway, where we actually went to the students rather than having them come to us, and part of our Project Rebound swag and masks. Next slide. Volunteering in the community, where we table and partner with a variety of different agencies in the community to get the word out. Again, all part of being in the pipeline and bringing people into that community that is within this pipeline. Next slide. Getting the women together. I think that it's important. Dr. Little did a presentation earlier specifically on women, and I think that it's critical to highlight that women have different needs. They have different pathways into prison. They have different pathways out of prison. Most individuals, when they come home, are thrust immediately back into caregiving responsibilities. And every single woman in this picture has that role, whether it's for a minor or an elder, every single person, siblings, every single person, immediately thrust into that role. And it's important, again, in terms of understanding equity and understanding how we support people within this pipeline, to recognize and acknowledge that women have different needs. Women come from a different place. And so one of the things that Project Rebound does is we are intentional about getting groups of people together to support each other. Next slide, please. We are also intentional about having fun. And this is just an example of that, where they went bowling. Next slide, please. I think it's important to understand that we build community. Again, going back to that intentional family. This is not your typical program because there's not a hierarchy here. We disassembled the concept of authority, right? Because it's not beneficial. It doesn't help, not in this particular place. Meeting people where they are at means removing that soapbox that you stand on, or that I would stand on. This is us goofing, but we're participating in a particular program, a Lock It Up program with the health center on campus. It was a social media push where we took pictures, and in this one is our goofy picture. But the sign that we're holding is that we commit, we agree to get rid of pharmaceuticals that are just hanging around, so that nobody gets a hold of them, all right, or lock them up so that juveniles cannot access them. Next slide. So the final goal, and this is my final slide, and I will wrap up the presentation and open it for questions. This is the goal. Regardless of where a person comes into the pipeline, regardless of how many people it takes to get them to where they're going, regardless if that place is AA, a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, a PhD, a JD, whatever it is, whatever little letters you want behind your name, okay? Whatever academic goal that is, that's what the pipeline does. It supports you and it meets you and it helps you obtain that goal. Arnold did all of the work. Nobody did his homework. He did his own homework. And all of my graduates do. I watched them. They work hard. Arnold teases about the fact that he doesn't know what is worse, what he went through in prison, all the years he spent in prison, or all the years he spent getting his degree. It's not that it is so hard, but it is hard. But you're not doing it alone, as long as you're part of that pipeline. And this is the goal. And that goal is why that pipeline is so important. We can end there and get rid of the screen, or open it for questions or conversation.
Thank you, Jennifer, for your presentation. It was definitely an eye-opener for, I'm pretty sure, many. So yes, we're gonna go ahead and open up for questions. You can feel free to unmute to ask the question or just drop it in the chat, either or. Any questions or comments?
Well, I thank you, Ms. Leahy, for doing this and presenting this. I haven't heard about this before, so I feel like I'm just kind of taking it in and trying to absorb it all. But what is your background? How did you get involved with this program? Or how did you?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to answer that. So I was, I was released in 2008 from prison, and I came home with a high school diploma. I had no intention of going to college. I had never considered it. No one had ever suggested I belonged in college, so it wasn't something I was thinking about. I was trying to get a job. Because of my criminal background, that was impossible. So my supervisor said, you have to do something. So I went to school. What I realized as I did the next assignment and completed the next test was that I really enjoyed it. In fact, I excelled at it. And the schools acknowledged that. And it was amazing to me. And I had an amazing mentor. By the time I was pursuing my bachelor's degree, Dr. Barbara Owen took me under her wing. She was directly underneath John Irwin, who established the Project Rebound program in the late 1960s at San Francisco State. She studied under him as an instructor and as a mentor. And she did for me what we are now doing for all these other students. She helped me make decisions and move forward, and she encouraged me. Next thing I knew, I had a bachelor's degree, and they were asking me to come to the master's program. And I did, and I graduated as a dean's medalist. And I was applying for jobs elsewhere, but some circumstances in my personal life caused me to stay in the Central Valley. And during that time, the chair asked me to take over a class that an instructor had left quickly, and I did. Turned out I had a talent for teaching, so I took on a full-time role as an adjunct lecturer in the criminology department. When Project Rebound came to Fresno State, I actually wasn't going to apply for the job. I didn't think I was qualified. I called a friend of mine who was also formerly incarcerated, and she was like, what are you talking about? You were running crews in the prison. You ran the welding shop. You ran the auto body shop. You were in charge of all of that, the ordering and the supplies and making sure people passed their safety and all of that. She goes, you've been supervising people for years. But because I hadn't been able to reframe the work I had done into the labels that were needed or used out here, I didn't understand that I actually had the qualifications for that job until my friend explained it to me. So again, this is another thing that's important about being in this pipeline, is because that identity and the undoing of your self-esteem that happens when you are incarcerated it's detrimental to success. And so having people unpack that for you helps. So that's why I came to the work. I have always believed in the power of education. While I was incarcerated, I saw that so many of the women, they didn't even have a GED. And I thought, how can you go home and be successful? How are you ever going to get a job if you don't even have a high school diploma? So I did have a high school diploma. So I took it upon myself to tutor them. They couldn't pass the math. That was the one thing. It's like they kept struggling with this math. So I tutored them. And education is powerful. It changed their lives. It changed mine. And so that's how I came to this work, because education changes lives for the better, and that changes our communities, and that reduces victimization. And in my own way, that's how I give back for all I've taken.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I have one other comment. In all of the history of hearing about the school to prison pipeline, I always associated the pipeline as the negative construct that is taking these kids who are at risk and putting them into prison, right? The systematic discrimination and racism. But you're using it in a whole nother way. So it's interesting.
Yes, and I can't take credit for that, but that concept. But I am definitely pushing it forward. We talk about the school to prison pipeline, and it's been negative, and it's been negative, and it's been negative. And I think it's time for us to start focusing on the positive. All of us changing the terminology we use to describe people, and in terms of the possibility. I heard someone recently that was talking about not calling people at risk, but calling them at promise, which sounds a little awkward to me, honestly, but the power behind it was so significant to me that I thought that's exactly what it is, So yeah, thank you. I agree that it's important to change it to a positive perspective. It can work positively, just like it worked negatively, right?
Well, thank you for that question and comment. Looks like we do have another post in the chat from Erin. It says, thank you. Love this program. I teach at Fresno State and Fresno City College. How can I get involved to help? Can my students get involved to help?
Oh, absolutely. You'll notice on my slide at the bottom of every slide, there was the email address. It's super easy to find us. Project Rebound at csufresno.edu. Really easy to find us. Arnold does presentations. Our students do presentations. When COVID kind of has thrown a wrench in everything. But when we do our community activities, we always reach out to students that want to be involved. We have a listserv that we can put allies on. We have a list so that you can be aware of programs for if you're an instructor or a facilitator, or you work in this field as an advocate. We do things occasionally for advocates as well. So we have an ally mailing list. We have a community cohort mailing list so that all of our students are on there. And when we hear about scholarships or job opportunities, we push that out via email. And so that's the primary way. If you would like to be involved, we would love to have you involved. You can just send an email to, let me put it in the chat. To Project Rebound, csufresno.edu. There's always opportunity. Yeah. And we would love to have the support, obviously.
Perfect. Thank you. We have a couple more comments, but we're down to about 4 more minutes till the end of our session. So Arnaldo asks, is there a list of majors on campus that state will not find employment within their major?
That they won't find employment within it? Is that what you asked?
Yes, that's what it says in the chat.
Oh, okay. So sure. I mean, we have to be realistic, right? We've made a mess. Maybe your mess is milk and it's old and it's stinky and it's going to take some work to clean up, but you can clean it up. Spilt milk. Okay. Even old stinky spilt milk, you can clean it up. But if you spill wine on a red carpet, you're screwed. You're going to have a stain. And you can do one of two things. You can take that stain and you can make it a speaking point to teach people how not to spill red wine on a white carpet, or you can put a piece of furniture on it and pretend like it never happened, but the stain's not going away. So that analogy is to say that if you were convicted of dealing drugs, you're never going to be a pharmacist. It's just not going to happen. You're not going to be a law enforcement officer. It's not going to happen. But that doesn't mean you can't teach in the prison, right? I have a green card. I have an actual card, CDC ID card, and that lets me go into the prison to teach. I don't work for CDCR, but I do go back into prison and teach. So whether or not your criminal conviction is going to stop you from getting a particular job or going into a particular field, yeah, be realistic about it. Again, if you sold drugs, you're not going to be a pharmacist, and there are certain crimes that are going to prevent you from doing certain things. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other ways. I may never work for CDCR as an instructor, but I can work for an agency that contracts with them. So there are alternatives to be able to accomplish what you want to do that's positive and contributes to your community in a good way and earn a living at it. Might have to get creative.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. I can go ahead and leave it open another minute or so for any further questions or comments. I am, however, going to post a link in the chat for a survey we have following this in this session. Okay. Any further questions, comments?
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for presenting. As very informative. And keep doing what you're doing. I'm sure it's making a difference, and a lot of people appreciate it very much.
Thank you.